I don't typically like survival stories. There's something about them that I just don't find as compelling as some other types of story tropes. Maybe it's something about the seclusion that I find kind of draining, like as a reader sometimes. I suppose the closest I can relate to like a actual survival setting is when I went hammock camping and then got raided by raccoons. I survived. The book that we're going to be talking about today is Hatchet by Gary Paulsen. Right? Yeah, Gary Paulsen. We're going to examine this book review with a lens of like a new beginner writer's perspective. What can we take away? What lessons can we learn from this book as we read it? Hatchet is a story of a 13-year-old boy named Brian who's dealing with the divorce of his parents. He's come upon his first summer with the split household, and he's going to go visit his father who lives in Alaska. And to go visit his father, that requires him to board a plane. But when I say plane, it's not like a commercial one from like a big airport. It's a small plane with him and just the pilot. This flight turns into a survival situation where he crashes into the wilderness and then has to deal with all of the consequences of living alone with no supplies in the Canadian wilderness. Now, unlike The Phantom Tollbooth, the last book that I reviewed, which I was absolutely astonished by and really struggled to find critiques, this book I do have some critiques. So what we're going to do is I'm going to make a compliment sandwich. I'm going to turn those 3 points, compliment, critique, compliment, into lessons that we can pull from this book and apply to our own writing. One thing that I love, and I really think is the best part of this book, is the drama with the parents' divorce and how it relates to Brian. It is like very realistic, very emotional, something that a lot of people could relate to and I think have similar feelings, so it makes it very easy to find Brian as a relatable character. Gary Paulsen in this book does a really good job balancing foreground and background. And that's going to be our first lesson, actually. If you are unfamiliar with these terms, foreground refers to something that is close to the camera or close and easily seen. It's up front that we can easily focus on. So in a movie, it's things that are close to the camera, and the background, just as you might assume, is the things that are happening behind the subject. So in terms of writing, foreground is what is happening around our characters. It's the conversations that we're having. It's what can be seen. It's what can be heard. It's using all of our 5 senses. That is foreground. Background stuff could be everything else. It could be the thoughts that have been lingering in the character's mind throughout the scenes. It could be a heavy emotion that's been weighing on the character, but it's not present actively or directly in the conversations that they're having or the thoughts that they're having. And that's what I really like. That subtlety, I think, is very, very cool. Gary Paulsen balances these two extremely well. I think it's very well paced for the most part, in terms of you get things that are survival, then you get things that are personal, then you get things that are kind of flashbacks or memories about things that have happened. I could have done with a few more of those. However, they are present, and I think that they are very well paced throughout the book. The very best moments of this book is when those background problems begin to well up and build and actually put themselves into the foreground, and they become very real problems for him to struggle with. At times, there was a time in this book where it gets very heavy and very dark. It's just for a short amount of time, but it was very powerful to me, and it's something that really caught my attention. This sort of balancing between the foreground and background is something that I really want to replicate through my stories. Now to the second lesson, repetition. There's a lot to say with this. I think there's a few moments in this book where it really started to feel like a slog and a drag, and then there's a lot of things that the character repeats over and over. And I understand that he's in a situation where that's realistic for him to go on and on about something or to keep bringing something up, but sometimes for the sake of the reader, it might just need a little bit of trimming here and there, or make things, or really pick and choose even more, maybe like 2 or 3 things that become repeating, and that would be immensely helpful. Let's take this for example. Like he was very excited when he got the opportunity to have some meat, right? So it had been a long time since he had anything like that's real food, and he's just going on and on about how excited he is to have this meat, and it's like first meat. He kind of locks onto these phrases that become a part of his survival. Again, I get it, and it makes it more realistic. However, for the sake of reading and the ease of the reading, and just for the overall enjoyment, I would have liked a little bit of the less repetition and fixating on those things. An example where I think the repetition is used very effectively, when he first lands in the wilderness, the first like kind of issue the wilderness gives, besides all of the immediate crashing, but one of the first problems he deals with is the mosquitoes. And these mosquitoes are really bothersome. And something that I think was really cool about the repetition was this repetition almost buzzed in our ears the annoying way that a mosquito would buzz, like in Brian's ears, or that we've all probably experienced before. However, it doesn't just end with the mosquitoes, it goes on to several other things. That's my biggest complaint with the book, was just the overall repetition and the fixating on some things, which I think could have been trimmed back a little bit for the ease and enjoyment of the reader. The last thing that I really enjoyed about this book was the progression. It feels like there's always something new to learn or to challenge Brian, and then it kind of feeds you little crumbs of the background information. There's kind of like a little bit of a secret going on that Brian knows about with the divorce, and he kind of feeds those secrets in little by little. And the way that you get to track Brian through the hero's journey when he goes all the way around the circle and back to the top again is really satisfying. And by the end of, I should warn spoilers here, but by the end of the story, he really feels like, oh, he's gonna be okay. Like, he's got this, versus from the very beginning when you're like, oh, I don't know if this 13-year-old boy is gonna make it. There is huge growth within Brian through the story, which is very satisfying. And I think that this is a great model for how your character can change and how the story changes a character. With this book being successful and enjoyable to read, it's really giving me the confidence of just giving room and space for main characters to fail. There's a lot of failure in this book on Brian's end, and it becomes to a point where it's quite harrowing. There's times where you're like, man, I don't know what else can go wrong for Brian, and yet he still finds a way to survive, right? He goes deep and figures it out. And that's really comforting, because sometimes I think in my writing, maybe you find it in your writing, you feel like this compulsion to like, oh, I need to be kind of fast. I need to write quickly. I need to keep the attention of the readers. And if I have too much failure, they're going to get annoyed and not want to read. But that is not the case. In this book, there is failure after failure, and there's times you feel frustrated at Brian, but really it just builds sympathy, and the way that he reacts is super important, because then it also builds relatability. And then you can kind of see how he clicks things together and learns these new skills from one to the next. And it's very satisfying by the end of the book. For me, this book has its flaws and it has its victories, but I would give Hatchet by Gary Paulsen 3.5 out of 5. Still think it's worth the read. It's not my favorite of the books. I'd still say it's well worth the read, especially if you're somebody who's interested in survival stories and realistic survival stories. And that fact, it almost feels like it should be based on a true story, but from what I've recently kind of just quickly glanced at the internet, it's not based on any sort of real events. So that's how convincing the book is. So in the comments down below, let me know if you've read the book, what would you rate it, and what lessons did you learn? And what lessons have you been learning from anything you've been reading recently by that fact? Thank you again for watching. I really appreciate you coming out. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. I really appreciate you, and I'll see you next time. Take care.